Hello, my friend, and welcome to Live at Your Edge. I'm Ashley. Live at Your Edge is about self-evolution, healing, growth, and this week I am sharing my experience with depression and what I have learned from it, especially now after, many years of working with it and sort of shifting my relationship to it. I just want to take a moment to say that everybody's experience with depression is different. So this, of course, is my own experience. If you have struggled with this as well, likely there will be some similarities and overlap, but of course there will also be differences. All of our experiences are unique. There's no right or wrong here. I want to share what my own experience has been with the hope that it may be helpful or supportive to you in some way. So, my story with depression started when I was an adult. And specifically, it was when I had finished school in my late 20s and sort of tumbled out into the world looking for work. I am someone who's a very mission-driven person, and I was extremely excited and passionate about my work and eager to make an impact. The job market was very tough at the time. But, I was determined to get work. And so I did. I built a network. I did succeed in breaking through that market and getting a job. And that sort of started for me this long period of working at these different jobs. I would work really hard and then basically burn out. And then there would be these periods in between of unemployment. And so there were these long periods for me where I either wasn't able to take adequate care of myself because I was working really hard and exhausted, or I was steeped in like a void without any work. At that time, that was a very toxic space for me. My depression would kind of come and go in these waves. It was never really gone, but it would kind of fade into the background for a while if, I was really distracted with a new job or something like that. So then if, the circumstances would shift and I was really exhausted or I'd be overworked or I'd be aimless because I wasn't working, then the depression would kind of descend over me again. And I would just be trying not to drown in it, honestly. For me, at the root of my depression was this kind of existential crisis. It was this deep sense of everything being meaningless, everything feeling pointless, everything feeling futile. Like the sense that the world was just this dark place where all these bad things would happen. Like I said, I'm a really meaning-driven person. And yet I just I wasn't really finding meaning in things. It felt like even the work I was doing in the world felt so futile. I would kind of just circle down into despair, into numbness sometimes, into just feeling like I couldn't go on. Honestly, I would get exhausted in that space. I still have all these really vivid memories of going for these really long walks near my home and the nearby neighborhoods, just to be outside, to try to keep myself from losing my mind. I also ended up taking this job at one point at a garden center. And it was this like upbeat, bustling, busy environment. It was very easy for me to feel sort of buoyed up by that place, by that work. And honestly, it kept me alive for years. I just felt so happy there and it fed a part of me so much. And during the off season, I often felt like I couldn't barely even survive. I kind of learned to dread the wintertime because that's when I would descend into an underworld where I literally could not separate or distinguish myself from the darkness. I was totally merged with my experience of it. I remember having these conversations, these phone conversations sometimes with my sister, who some of you may remember from season 1. And my sister is this very, very wise human being. And she would say to me, Ashley, remember that the darkness isn't you. That isn't you. And I could hear how badly she was trying to help me understand something. And yet at the time, I honestly had no idea what she meant. because I felt like it was me. That's me in the darkness. I couldn't separate myself enough. I didn't understand then that sort of the purest essence of a human being is light, is pure light. And that the darkness was an experience I was having, but it wasn't me, right? And I just didn't understand what she meant by that. I couldn't make any sense of it. I felt so merged with it. And that's actually part of why I think it was so awful. I've never experienced anything worse, honestly. It was so dark that I had many moments where I wished not to be here on the earth anymore. I just felt like I wished it would be over. And that experience in itself was so painful, and it filled me with immense grief because it was like me giving up on life because it was too painful for me to stand it. And yet I found that so horrifically sad that even though I wanted relief from this awful experience, I was just grief-stricken that I wanted that. And so I was caught in this very, very painful place for a long time. One of the reasons that I want to talk about this, though, is because for me at the time, there really wasn't anybody in my life that really related to what I was going through at that time. And so I think it feels important to share my experience. But so, okay, here is the thing about this. My depression is what started my search for deeper answers. It was the beginning of my years on a healing path, on a spiritual path, on a coming home to myself path that I've been on now for the last, 9-ish years, since 2017, the beginning of 2017. And so there's a lot more that I could say about my years in depression, but what I really want to do now is share some of the biggest things that I have learned from those experiences. The first thing I want to talk about is what was underneath my depression. What was creating it? There's 4 things that I'm going to share that are like important understandings that I now have of it that I did not have before. The first thing is this pattern of self-suppression. So for me, there was this long-term suppression of a lot of emotion, unprocessed experiences, self-denial, like a lifetime of pushing down my emotions and denying or gaslighting my own actual experiences of things. Also, like not letting myself go deeply enough into my emotions to actually process things out. And the reason for that was because there was an enormous amount of that stuff in there, like mountains of darkness inside of me at the time. And to be honest, I really just did need help learning how to navigate that. I honestly think that the path I ended up taking was exactly what I actually needed in order to learn how to do that. And so that's the first thing. The self-suppression piece was enormous for me. And so the second thing that was at the root of my depression was this toxic, wound-based relationship that I had to myself. For me at the time, there was an emotional landscape of all this self-doubt, a lot of self-hatred, and not enoughness that was, in my view, originally created through my early life experiences, the way I'd been conditioned and taught by society. And as a result of that, it made it very, very hard, if not impossible, for me to bring love into those spaces, into those experiences that I was having, and into those emotions I was having. I just wasn't capable. I wasn't able to arrive at that state at the time because I had so much sort of toxicity in my relationship to myself, so much not enoughness and self-hatred. The third thing that was an important source for my depression was this sense of separateness. I felt completely separate from everything. I felt cut off and separate from other people, from the world at large. I just felt fundamentally alone, like deeply, deeply alone and cut off from everything. I hadn't yet started a spiritual path for myself. I was very much not on a spiritual path. I was an atheist at the time. I really did not have any connection to what I would call a spiritual life. And so I really wasn't able to connect with the true nature of reality, which is that oneness, that unity of everything, and the infinite field of awareness that exists. I really needed spiritual mentorship before I was even aware that that was possible or could start learning how to actually do that. The other part of that is that I also honestly just needed my energy body and my emotional body to be clearer before I could deeply connect to that field. My body was just so filled with all this energetic stuff clogging up my system that I really needed to have my body and psycho-emotional field, my energetic field, be clearer before I was going to be capable of doing that. So for me, this took working with spiritual teachers and also a lot of openness on my part to new ways of thinking, new ways of seeing things that I had in my earlier life been taught were, bullshit, were woo-woo. I had lived my entire life surrounded by scientists, like including my parents, and I trained in science. So I was surrounded and deeply immersed in science and with the people around me as scientists for my entire life up until this point. And so the truth is actually that I think it was my depression, the desperation that I had from my years of living and struggling with my depression, that is actually what made me open enough to actually take in some new ways of seeing things. The last thing that I want to name as a source of my depression or as a root cause was this merging with my emotional states. And I alluded to that a little bit at the beginning. And this is what my sister was very gently and lovingly trying to help me see, but that I couldn't connect with at the time. Yes, that darkness was a real experience, but because I was merged with it psycho-emotionally, it was honestly 10 times worse than if I had been able to build a sense of distinction between my raw essence as a divine human being or, as a light being and the dark energy that was there with me at the time. So those are the 4 pieces of what was kind of underneath the depression for me. So next, I want to share about what I've learned about how to shift that experience, like how to grow through that experience. I think for me, this slow, piece by piece, emotional healing process, gradually learning to welcome in my emotions, doing trauma work, processing all the unprocessed experiences was maybe the only way through for me. That was just my path. And so I'm not saying that that's necessarily the path for everyone, but here are some of the takeaways that I want to share, which is that 1, therapy was not going to help this, or at least it didn't help for me, at least not the kind that I had, which was kind of the more classical psychotherapy. I worked with a clinical psychologist at the time, and it couldn't help me with what I needed. I needed like serious training in how to become a space for my emotions, how to welcome everything in, how to journey through myself. Therapy just couldn't do that for me. It couldn't teach me all of those things, or at least the kind that I had at the time couldn't. And so I actually learned through retreats. I trained initially in the Vipassana meditation tradition for like the first year or so of my path. And then when I started to get the sense that I'd gotten what I could out of that training and I knew I really needed to go deeper, that's when I went into training with Sabrina Lynn at Rewilding, which was deep, 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 deep work. This was somatic work, spiritual work, reclamation of lost parts of the self. This was archetypal work, shamanic journeying, embodiment practices, releasing trauma. This was going into a deeply held temple space with a bunch of other women and doing like lead practices. And this stuff was so deep and so embodied. Like that's what rewilding really was and is. It's about embodiment. And so this work involved letting the body shake, letting the body scream, letting the body gag, vomit, like literally everything, you name it, letting the body express and release years and years and years of unprocessed emotions and experiences. Basically, all the bottled up shit from the first 32 years of my life, and in my view, stuff from past lives, previous lives as well. Because some of the stuff that I processed through those retreats was not stuff I had experienced in this lifetime so far. These were the years, those early years, when I really learned to do this kind of work. This is where I started building a lot of the capacity that I have now. This is like the initial training period for me. And it kicked off this period of many years of clearing my emotional body. Releasing, shedding. I mean, there was like 10,000 pounds of emotional debris that had to be burned off. And I honestly feel so lucky that I got to do that in a sacred space with other women. I feel incredibly lucky. I was journeying with other women who were going through their own unique paths, but some very similar experiences too. And I learned an enormous amount during that period, not only from my teachers, but also from my peers at the time. I do think that learning from spiritual teachers, having wise spiritual teachers really is essential. And so whether that's having a teacher online or in person, I think it doesn't really matter. But I think having some really wise person who's walked that kind of terrain before is, in my view, really essential. It was through that shedding process that only then, once my system kept rewiring over and over and over again, as I kept doing this work, that the depression fog that I had lived with for so long stopped kind of descending and stagnating over me. I do still have some dark moments that arrive in my life, but I just occupy that space completely differently. And so part of what I want to share here is an important learning about this shift in the relationship to that darkness. Because what happens now when a dark state arrives is that I've learned how to get into a sort of contemplative state where, I'm praying to God, to the goddess, like whatever you want to call that energy, that field of awareness. I'm asking for help. And then I am like allowing myself to descend, like walk down into that darkness, that underworld, as like a medicine space though, which is a fundamentally different way of orienting to it than what I was in before, which was feeling like this horrible monster had like come over me and was crushing me to death. It felt completely different. Now I would say that I've learned that if the darkness is coming, it's coming for a reason and it needs to be there. There's something inside there that is asking to be transformed. And so I've learned not to resist it anymore, not to fight against it, at least not for very long. The other important thing is that I'm reminding myself that the darkness is there. It is an experience I am walking through, but it is not me. And that helps me to have this layer of context of like almost separation, not because I'm not immersing fully in it, but because I'm not identifying with it as one and the same as me. It's like I have this layer of separation between my true essence and the experience that I'm in. I will also say that what I have found is that usually when this kind of thing drops in, this kind of dark space, it's often related to an ego death of some kind. Just a part of ourselves that's actually false and that we don't need anymore, and it's coming up to the surface to be shed. So there's often something asking to be shed, but it feels dark because to the ego, it's a death. Because we're so identified oftentimes with the ego as us, we don't realize that that part can shed and we are still whole. And so the truth is that a lot of the material that I have shared here on the podcast before, all that stuff has come from my experiences working through that dark space that manifested as depression for me. It feels important for me to share this experience because it has been such a large feature of my life. And it really has been sort of like an origin story for me, at least in terms of my path of the last 9 years and how I've ended up where I'm at now. I also just want to say at the end, like, if this is something that you are struggling with now or have in the past, you are absolutely not alone. I really think that so many of us walk through this territory to get where we are going. And there is a way through, but it is often hard won. And it can take a lot of time and sustained effort and sustained intention. But I do think that having as much support as we are able to accept can be at least of the right kind, right? The kind of support we need, which for me was spiritual teachers, but whatever kind of support we need, as much of that as we can possibly accept, can possibly allow ourselves to have, I think can really be so important and beneficial. So thank you so much for tuning in today. I want to wish you a wonderful week, and I will see you on the next episode.